Raw on our occasional series. We are maturing into occasional Jaw talkers. I hope you're really well. It's been a beautiful day today. I hope you've been able to get out and you haven't been stuck inside formulating diets or whatever you might be doing. I hope you've been having a good day. I'm really excited. I met Billy Hoekman. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, Billy. Please correct me if I'm not. Billy Hoekman. I think it's Dutch, but that's maybe the first.
You're correct. Yes.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. There he is. Okay. Billy Hoekman. And I was charmed from the first. A very unpretentious and very knowledgeable man who is a leading light in the US nutrition world. He's a great advocate for raw and all aspects of progressive raw thinking. So I'm really, really happy to, if I can work the technology, say hi, Billy. Good evening from us, and good afternoon to you.
Yes, exactly right. It's only 3 here, so we're doing well.
Okay, fantastic. It's great to see you. Are you well? Have you had a good day so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Can't complain. I live here in Philadelphia, and it's starting to be sunny and beautiful every day, so can't complain about that.
Okay, this is great. Okay, so listen, people are jumping on really, really well here. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Gail and Zoe and Libby. Libby Halpin says, yes. Here, I can show you. Billy,
Oh,
have a look,
I
have
can
a look,
see.
have a look.
Yes.
Here you go. Have a look. You like that?
I'll take it.
Livy, yeah, for sure. Yeah, life is short. Okay. Eileen is saying good, a good best wishes to you. Fantastic. This is good. And Emma is in the house. She's saying, greetings to the Kombucha King. Fabulous. Good call, Emma. Great call. Great call. Okay, wonderful. Well, we're all gathering. So, Billy, thank you for being with us. Thank you for giving us your time. We really, really appreciate it. This side of the pond, but it's not only the Brits. We've got Europeans. We've got Dutch. We've got Aussies. Many different countries are represented. So it's great to have you here. Thank you very, very much. So tell us about your first experiences with raw. What got you into it in the first place? What got you from being a Kibble fan, as we all are, because that's the way we're raised, unfortunately, to being raw interested?
Well, I don't. It's interesting because I never had any sort of experience with dogs or cats growing up. I never had a pet. My current dog is my first dog ever.
Okay.
And so I was learning it all from the beginning. The only thing when I got my dog was I asked my mom, beforehand, how much does it cost to buy dog food? And she said, well, I buy the fancy, more expensive stuff at Walmart. So that was that was my first intro.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, I don't know, my wife would tell you I talk about like 4 different subjects, and that's pretty much it for me. And it probably becomes pretty annoying to her.
Well, that's pretty good. I taught one subject, nutrition. That's it. I am a dinner party bore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's like, but nutrition was one of those things. And for some reason, when I got Lua, my dog, who will actually be 15 in August, so she's got a birthday coming up, I said, what do I feed this dog? And for some reason, that never became uninteresting to me. I always wanted to push it. I always wanted to figure out what can I do? What can I do? How can I make this better? And that's what really, continues to drive me today. I'm trying to think when my actual first, because I remember going through the steps that most people go through, which is like, oh, I'll do this better kibble and I'll put in some canned and I'll do, X, Y, and Z. And I remember home cooking a diet, and then I remember switching to raw. And obviously, since then it's been, a whole different story for me, but yeah, it's really shaped, Lua and this pursuit has really shaped my life. And I really just, will never stop appreciating that. That's why I always give her the shout outs on all of the videos.
We see. How old is she now? How old is she?
So she'll be 15 in August, and
Whoa.
she's doing very, very well. And we actually this spring went for like a baby moon before we had my daughter in May, and she's a pug, and she went on a 5 mile hike with us and did the whole thing. So she's still she was kind of falling asleep at the end while walking, but I take a lot of pride in that. And one of the things that I really love, sort of want to bring to just the industry in general, is the ability to try to push things further. So I think that, oftentimes we look at, and this is kind of a non sequitur, but, just something that I think that, Lua has always sort of instilled in me, is to say, yes, we know what, the ancestral diet of a dog should be, and we know these factors, but how do we make it better? And how do we continually push that to make it, I think oftentimes we look at diets of animals and say, what is the diet of, a wild dog or a wolf? And say, okay, well, that's optimal. Well, maybe not, though. Let's make it much better than that. And one of the things that I, just an example of that would be, all around the internet, there's this study now with spirulina and, its effects on rabies, and it also, its effect on allergies.
Reducing allergies, yeah.
And I would posit to you, what wolf or wild dog would be eating spirulina? None of them. But we know it has an incredibly positive effect on their physiology for these foods.
Yeah.
So, that's what, in the raw segment, that's kind of what I try to bring to the table is how do we push this further? How do we, I would say right now, my, the bulk of my dog's diet is eggs and raw colostrum. What dog has ever lived on fermented raw colostrum? So what dog has ever lived on that?
Wow.
In the history of dogs? Probably none. So she's a guinea pig, apparently. But, it's kind of like one of those things where, I think that's what I'm just thankful that, having Lua in my life has inspired that, passion for wanting to do that. So
that's amazing. How are her poos on a fairly fiber-free diet?
Well, no, there is, I work for Green Juju, and we are a plant-based company for the most part. So there is definitely, I do have experience with animals on the, just milk diet side, but there's plenty of fiber and plenty of those awesome phytonutrients in the diet.
Okay.
But I will say this, they are, when I do add the extra protein, it's normally like cod or fish-based. Okay. And so they are primarily yellow. But that's not a problem for me. So,
but they're good. They're good, and she's comfortable, and she's good in good shape.
100%.
Amazing. Okay, so I was going to say, what lessons have you learned? But basically, Lua's your teacher, and you're learning every day, and you're continuing to learn. So, you mentioned that you're working now with Green Juju. Tell us all about that, because it's a new venture, and I think many people won't be familiar with the company. Give us a little bit of background and where you fit in and what they do.
Yeah, so we don't have a complete and balanced food, but we're in the business of how do we make diets better, just generally. So one of the reasons I chose, there's a few reasons I kind of chose to work with Green Juju. Number one, the founder, Kelly, is really great. I've known her for about 10 years. Number two, I'm at a stage in my career where I'm looking to affect as many diets as possible. So, I love the nutrition nerds out there, all the people watching this that want to do that. But I also have a big spot in my heart for those that don't care about nutrition, that they're going to feed kibble no matter what. And how can we impact that diet? How can we make that diet better? Even if it's, 10% of the diet, or a little thing here, a little thing there. And so, that's kind of the space that we're kind of fitting in. And the other reason too was, going back to the innovation thing and kind of pushing those boundaries, we know that plants, being a sort of, mostly plant-based company, we know that plants have a very positive effect. We can look at studies in dogs' diets. And I want to look into that and say, how do we maximize the nutrient content of these things? If you're talking about, vegetables, things like that. So basically we have two kind of flagship whole food supplements. So it's basically Kelly brought something very innovative to the space of someone might supplement their dog or their dog's diet with vegetation, and they might grind them up or steam them. But what we actually do is juice them and then add the pulp back to break down the cell walls further than that, and to sort of pre-digest it. And then we're also adding coconut oil and bone broth to that mix. Obviously for those benefits, and then also for the fats, and even the fat in helping to control that blood sugar, in terms of when they're consuming it. We also have a bone broth, and then we just released some freeze-dried treats as well. So it's a small company and a very innovative company, and we are just very excited in the next year or so to come out with new products. And I think obviously most people are expecting some of those things to be fermented, and they would be right, down the line here.
Inevitable, isn't it? Yeah, for sure. Great. This is amazing. And how much nutrient loss? Because obviously, as soon as you start chopping up a cabbage, cavolo nero, whatever it might be, there will be some oxidation happening there. How do you get around that? And have you done any testing between the fresh and maybe something that's been in your freezer for a month or so? I mean, are those any studies that you've done?
Not that I'm familiar with, but when it comes to you're going to get oxidation in any process. A good example of that would be when I am supplementing, or when I'm formulating my own dog's diet, and I mentioned putting fish there, right? I will actually take that cod, the fillet, and actually put it in like a food processor and just pre-cut it up and have it in the fridge for, 3 days or so. Yeah. I know that there's some breaking down there. There's some slight oxidation, but I think that generally when you look at the numbers, especially coming from like the frozen food industry, which is, one of my mentors came from, I think that's slightly overblown in terms of the nutrient loss. You still, if you're looking at, 6 months shelf life in the freezer, you're not, depending on the actual vitamin. So like vitamin E will deplete more than, other vitamins, for example. But I think that can be, slightly overstated. So I think, being a small company, we speak more to results, in that case. So
Gotcha. Okay. So, but you know what, even if you've got 5% oxidation, 5% loss of nutrients, you're still 95% ahead of the Hills, the Royal Canins, and the Eukanubias of this world. So, because you're putting in real phytonutrients. So, like you say, I think it's an academic. I was just kind of interested just to see whether, has anybody done those kind of studies as to, how much vitamin C degrades over time with freezing?
Definitely with freezing, but probably not with like, the difference between if you have like a full carrot and then chop it up and then look at the nutrients there. But the other thing too that I think people need to maybe just realize just generally is that food nutrient testing is not exactly what it's chalked up to be. So if a good example of that would be vitamin D. The test for vitamin D is kind of ridiculous. Like you could test the same, you could send the same food to a lab, 10 times and you'd get different readings for vitamin D. So then you could say, well, we know it's there, but we don't know the exact amount. And so for me, a lot of times I go back to, whole foods. I go back to how do we, build a diet, or how do we contribute to a diet? And it really just goes back to that because, a good example of that for me personally, in my own diet, I take fermented cod liver oil.
Okay.
And on the packaging, they just say contains varying amounts of A and D, because there is no way to actually predict exactly how much A and D is going to be in every single batch.
Is that being honest about what they put in, or is that being realistic about different levels of fermentation because of different points in the vat or whatever it might be? They just realize that there's too much variety to be able to just nail it down to one figure.
I think both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us about the vitamin D thing. Why is testing vitamin D such a variable feast?
Well, I think that the sensitivity of the test is not very low. So basically, from what I've seen in terms of vitamin D testing, and working with like full diets and things like that, or even just products generally, you send the test out and you get it back, and it'll basically be like it's too low for this test to discover, but that too low amount is actually a good amount.
Okay,
Is actually a pretty good amount.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh, and I would say that's true, with most fat soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin K2, but especially vitamin K2. I mean, there's not really good testing for that in general, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's people get very excited about that with pregnancy. Yeah, so you've probably been down that line. Do you want a shot of vitamin K, or are you going to manufacture it yourself, etc., etc.? Because you are a new dad. So congratulations.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yeah. It's I'm doing this interview somewhere else for that reason. I live in an apartment, and no, but she's the best. She's the best. Her name is Maple, and she is just the cutest thing in the world. So
that's amazing. Okay, so let me just ask you about. There's a big division within the raw food world: those who feed vegetable material of some sort, and those who are dead against it, and they just feed animal derived material, whether that's complete, whether they're feeding skin or whether they're feeding horn, whether they're feeding good range of organs and glandular tissue. I don't know, but where are you on that? I presume you're a pro-veg guy. If you are, why are you? What's your logic? What brings you to that place?
Well, I've always been, a pro vet. I think I've known, previously mostly for animal products, but I've also, I've always been a pro veg person for dogs. So even just looking back on the last, 11 years of my career and working with dogs and formulation and those sorts of things, I've always, this is going to be the anecdotal bit for me. I've always noticed animals having better digestion when they include, if it's just an all meat diet, because I've worked with those sort of products, versus an all vegetable diet. I've just noticed that they've always had better digestion. Not only have I noticed in my own dog, but in the, thousands of dogs I've worked with, across the country. But also, I mean, I think that the study with kibble and green leafy vegetables and kibble and orange and yellow vegetables done in 2005.
Oh, the Purdue study.
Yeah, I think that closes the book on that. We know, obviously this was done with kibble. So from a science perspective, you can say, yes, all we know is that it's positive for animals with kibble. But I think you can kind of extrapolate that out and say, okay, it would be positive for other animals as well. Yeah. So we know that they are, when you're talking about reducing cancer rates by, 90 and 70%, you're talking about those dogs actually, ingesting these plants and getting those phytochemicals and getting those antioxidants. Now, the problem runs into when people try to use plants for things that they're not good at, like protein and fat and those types of things. That I would not be in favor of. So when I talk about things like green juju and adding, the blends, they are there for phytochemicals. They're there for antioxidants. They're there for those vitamin precursors like, beta carotene that aren't going to turn into vitamin A, but are going to be useful, in an antioxidant capacity or something like that. Yeah. And also, even when you look at ancestral diets, wolves eat plant material when they can. There are certain there are wolves in certain areas that eat a large percentage of their diet as blueberries during certain types of year. Yeah. And other wild, so I think you can kind of look at all of those different things and say, to exclude something based on a philosophy, because I think most of those are philosophical arguments rather than nutrition arguments, because we know that they have a positive effect.
Yeah.
So to exclude something just because you want to get back to a certain,
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, no dog or cat in the world right now, just maybe, that's owned by a person, eats what a wolf eats, or eats what because they don't eat chicken from a grocery store, or they don't, we all make concessions along the way.
Yeah.
And when we do that, I think, the other thing too is for dogs living in the city, I think they try to find their greens by eating grass and by doing these things. And obviously we know the chemical load that is coming into a lot of these animals. And so for me, I'm thinking to myself, there's no good reason not to. I've never been presented with good evidence or good argument to not feed vegetation.
I'm with you all the way there. And when I speak to people, I say, okay, dogs given half a chance will pick blackberries in the autumn from the bush, without any, my little Whippet cross Italian greyhound. She, at 6 months old, fresh out of the womb, her first autumn, she was picking them, straight off the bush, without any provocation. So that says to me that's ancient wisdom. Also, cats don't eat herbivore poo, and dogs do. Given half a chance, they will. They may go for their own, but they will almost inevitably go for rabbit and sheep and horse and what have you. So that's it. And also, and I don't know how you can not go with those arguments, but they will also eat, if they're eating the carcass. Now, there's some argument that says, okay, the wolf won't eat the contents of a rumen, of an antelope or a sheep or goat or what have you, but you can be absolutely sure they will eat the intestine. There's a lot of good nutrition to be had with the small intestine, the large intestine, and the contamination of those with food material, partially fermented, partially digested, fully chewed, green grassy material. That's a slam dunk for me.
Exactly right.
They've been exposed to this stuff, and therefore it's likely that they've developed some kind of necessity to it. Maybe that's where the spirulina comes in. Is the gut contents is so rich and so full of nutrients that maybe spirulina is kind of the closest we can get without feeding gut contents from sheep and grass-fed cattle. Now that would be a dream of mine, actually, would be to get gut contents, but small intestine contents from cattle and sheep, and put it in a pot and sell it to the public.
That is a true nutrition nerd talking right there. I'll tell you something that's very interesting. It has nothing. It sort of has to do with what you're talking about, but I just thought this was super fascinating. I was doing an event in Chicago recently, and this guy who had been to a few of the events came up and was chatting with me. And he was actually he's a hunter, and he goes down to Wyoming to do some hunting stuff there. And he was talking about the wolf population in that area. And the wolf population is protected, and so they basically have like a smorgasbord of whatever they want, right? They have a ton of food, be it game or sometimes they're actually eating people's cows, that kind of thing. But this just blew my mind. He said that there's so much food there that some of these wolves will actually take down an animal and just eat their placenta and leave the rest.
Oh,
isn't that the craziest thing? I mean, it makes sense because it's a high value organ,
rich,
but it blew my mind that would be happening. So
wow, that's like going to McDonald's and picking out the gherkin and leaving the rest behind.
Yeah, it's a very I'm going to pretend like I know what gherkin means, just to throw that out there. But
okay, well, no, that would be a fermented like a dill pickle.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Yes, that makes sense. Sorry, there was a culture barrier there.
I apologize. I thought gherkin was worldwide.
Yeah.
We used to call them gherkins in New Zealand when I was there. So I apologize. There you go. You learn something every day. That's good. We've learned something, Billy. Amazing. Okay, fantastic. Great. Good thoughts. Some good thoughts there. And KZ from San Francisco Raw has put up some references there, which is very interesting, about books on some of these questions of how to best preserve vegetables. So it's interesting. It'll be on the on the comments if you want to have a look afterwards. Casey, I spoke to her about a couple of months ago. She's a fascinating woman and an absolute powerhouse. Have you spoken to her at all? San Francisco Raw?
Yeah, I did. And if it's the person I'm thinking of, at conference in Chicago a few years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really impressed. We had a great chat and so friendly and so open with all her knowledge. Fantastic. So when we spoke yesterday in preparation, just make sure everything was going to work for today, you said you've seen either one of something that I've done or something that the Raw Pet Medics have done. The Raw Pet Medics, by the way, for anybody who hasn't seen it, we're on Tuesdays now at 7:00 UK time. So please join us. Brendan Clark and Connor Brady and I talk geeky nutrition stuff and have a laugh and take the mick out of each other. And it's a good nutrition 45 minutes. You're very welcome to come along. But Billy, you say you saw me or us talking about fat.
Yeah, I was there last week for at
least
least some of it. Yes, I'm a fan of fat. So it was one of those situations where I was thinking to myself, like, oh, I wish I could chime in on this. But then I was like, oh, I'll actually be with you next week, so maybe I can chime in on it, because fat's one of my favorite subjects. And I thought that Connor said something that was just exactly, what I've been thinking about for the past, year or two. And I just thought it was so right. When we were talking about, omega-3 to 6 ratios and talking about, and the thing he kind of left it on was, one of the things in his book he talks about is, it being a 5-to-1 ratio from omega-3 to 6, in the average, wild canine diet or whatever it might be. Yeah. And that people can become, sort of obsessed with how do we reduce that down to 3-to-1, 2-to-1, 1-to-1, and they're supplementing with all these fish oils to get to that level. And I just, he said, maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe the right approach is to feed these foods, and then let that ratio go where it comes. And I just thought that's exactly sort of what we need to, be thinking about. So when I formulate my own dog's diet, I just look at the ratio of each ingredient, and then I say to myself, where's the overall ratio going to be? That's just kind of an interesting thing I look at. Yeah. But you can, if you're making a diet at home, you can make a diet without doing any supplementation that fits within that healthy range, even 2-to-1 or 1-to-1, because, and the other thing too on that is, and just to get people thinking about this, because this is kind of the melding of both human nutrition and dog nutrition, is the main source of omega-3 fatty acids in the diet for most people is fish, right? Because you're looking for EPA and DHA. But something to think about that's very interesting is in mammals, fish are mostly made of EPA, right? We know that. Yeah. And there's some DHA there. But mammals are not. And mammal cells actually work better, much better with DHA. So the interesting thing to think there is the EPA is useful, but you're going to get more of that, supplementing with mostly fish. And DHA is just a much better source of for the brain and how that works and how the body functions. So one of my favorite places, and you can actually look at the research for this. And I think that this is somewhat lacking as well, because most of the diet formulation systems and most of the info that people are looking at is based on USDA data, right? And so we know that that's not going to be relevant to grass-fed beef. We know that's not going to be relevant to pasture-raised eggs. Yeah. The number one thing I use to actually, supplement my dog's diet in my formulation is egg yolks. Okay. And the reason why is because if you look at if you look at a pasture raised egg, and I think this research comes out of the University of Minnesota, you can look at the averages in terms of the fat there. But the average one chicken egg yolk is going to have 205 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids, which is a significant contribution, wherein 180 of that is DHA.
Right. Okay.
So you're getting the much, much higher DHA level. So, that can be an overall contributor. But I just think that's kind of interesting that I just thought that was very smart of him to say, like, maybe it's better just to feed food and source it correctly.
Yeah. I mean, those analyses where they get 5-1, I wonder whether they were carcasses and how much organ meat was in there, and whether that was a gutted carcass or whether that was ungutted. Because the way I look at it is that you get omega-3 from leafy greens, you get omega-6 from seeds, and so if you've got a dog eating a rabbit, wild fed rabbit, who's chomping away on herbs and leafy greens and grass, there's going to be a fairly high level of omega-3 in the gut, which is kind of transient. And so I'd be interested to see what analysis, whether they put an entire rabbit into a mincer and measured omega-3, or whether there was some kind of dressing involved in those carcasses in order to get that 5-1 ratio. Because it seems strange that dogs may require 5-1, and yet humans, the hunter-gatherers, everyone I've read says it's kind of about 1-1.
I think it depends. I've seen research, in humans that's anywhere from 1-1 to 9-1 in being in that scale. Okay. So I think it would depend on the person, but it's hard to tell. But for me personally, in terms of formulating those diets, I am able to formulate a diet that I would say is probably, if I had to just estimate, because I don't have it in front of me, but I would say it's probably 2-1.
Yeah.
And I haven't supplemented with anything in terms of doing that. I'm just using food, and I'm also not, and so I just, I think it's a very interesting, and you guys also plugging the book, Deep Nutrition was pretty awesome too.
Shanahan, I love her. Yes, I love her. She's fantastic. So
everyone should.
Sorry, after you.
Everyone should read that book if you want to get to know. There's 2 books on that just for general nutrition, but also Know Your Fats by Mary Enig. That's the other one that everyone should read if you want to know the biochemistry of how fats work.
Yeah, I just looked that up. Yep, literally an hour ago, because you mentioned it yesterday. So that's fantastic. That's a good recommendation. I always like book recommendations because you can really broaden the argument. And you know what, and I don't want to bore everybody about omega-3s, but if omega-3s do come from grass and kind of leafy green vegetables, if you're not anywhere near the sea, then it's going to be seasonal, isn't it? It's going to be highest in spring and summer, and it's going to wane in autumn and winter. So
100%. So those short chain, So a good example that would be, I live in Pennsylvania here, and we are lucky enough to be able to buy raw butter, and just directly, from the farm. I actually go to a farm, and it's an honor system store. So there's just a container with money. You take whatever you want, make your own change, and the farmer's not even there. But if you notice, the butter is going to be totally different nutritional properties during the spring and summer. We try to, it's frozen, so we try to buy as much as we can during the spring and summer, because you can physically see the difference. And the same thing with egg production as well. If you live in a winter climate, you're buying local eggs, you'll see the yolk color change, and you'll see, they can measure the amount of omega-3s in something that's, filled, or that's eaten grains, because, you were astute to point out that grains are omega-6s for the most part, and that's why they're terrible for our diets as well.
Yeah.
Versus the animals that are out on pasture, and so if a native wolf population or wild dog population was in a climate that changed drastically, yeah, their diet, they might be getting, differing amounts of those, those fatty acids throughout the year.
Yeah.
And even now, I mean, how do you even predict, a wolf's diet in a modern situation? Because the thing that the wolf might be eating, if it's like a deer or something, they might be eating like GMO corn out of a field. So if they're, if they're doing that or whatever they're eating, then, their diet might be changing as well. But, I think, the body is good at adapting at those things. It's good that there's variance there, there's variety,
Yeah.
and that we can kind of, go with the flow with that. I would just recommend to people, the number one thing, even for me, because I know when I had, when we had Maple, I love feeding my dog. It's like my favorite thing, putting it all together, doing all that. But I was like, oh my God, I'm so busy. I can't even, at the beginning there, I was like, I have to throw this stuff together and be able to do that. And so, whatever formulation people end up on, do what is available to you and what works and is easy. It's because if it's hard to do that and it's hard to source a particular way, you're not going to do it. And so, that's what I would say to people is do the best you can and don't worry too much about, is it a 4-to-1? Is it a 3-to-1?
Yeah.
If you're feeding actual food, you're doing awesome. So
yeah. And the seasons will take care of variation, because if you're shopping locally, which I think is a great idea, as much as possible, and you're using grass-fed as much as possible, even if you just feed beef and local greens, there will be a cyclicity within the meat that you give. I don't think that's a good idea, but if you were pushed, then nature would provide variation just from a season by season basis. So that's kind of reassuring. There are no straight lines in nature. A lot of circles, no straight lines.
Well, and one side note on that, which I just think is interesting as well. If you look at the research with grass-fed beef, I've seen basically anywhere from a 2-to-1 to 1-to-1 omega-3 to 6 ratio in grass-fed beef. But here's the really interesting thing. The overall fat content of beef, there's not that many omega-3s in it. So I believe, don't quote me on this because again, I'm not looking at my spreadsheet, but I believe it's like 15 milligrams per ounce of omega-3 fatty acids. But you still have that
ratio
1-to-1 or 2-to-1. You're just not getting a lot of omega-6s. So you're looking at other types of fats as well. And
yeah, but if you're not putting a lot of omega-6 in, you don't need as much omega-3 to counteract the pro-inflammatory effects.
That's true.
Maybe that's...
You can look at the base level of what they need to function. That's kind of where I was at. And I basically, with my own dog's diet, I said, what's the base level of function? I'm going to double that. And then that's what I'm going to shoot for. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that because, one of my favorite things is raw milk and fermented raw milk. Been doing a lot of that at home. Just from a fatty perspective, because this is just interesting to me. Raw milk has over 400 types of fats in it, and it is the most fat diverse food on the planet.
Fermented raw cows, grass-fed cow's milk.
Or just raw milk generally and that's just what we know. Like they discover new things about it all the time, but over 400 different types of fats, which makes sense because be it, anything, breast milk, goat milk, cow milk, it's all made, it's all made to sustain something completely. And so that's like, a can of worms in and of itself, because we can, identify and say, look, we have identified omega-3s to be healthy. We've identified omega-6s to be healthy and unhealthy, depending on the ratio and how they work. But then you kind of open up, the can of worms and say, well, this food has 400 different fatty acids, and we know they all have a different metabolic function. So good luck figuring that one out.
Yeah.
Right? Just shows you how little we know.
Start your PhD now, and then line up for another 5 after that, and you might just scrape the barrel.
Exactly.
That's amazing, Billy. Just yeah, we could go on forever. This is a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Is there any closing thoughts or any events that you want to, or references, things that stand out that you want to share to point people towards?
Well, I will tell you this. It is nice to be, getting back out there and doing some events now and being able to see people. And so, with Green Juju, we're going to be doing some events. We're going to be doing some more, Facebook lives and things like that. And just for me personally, this year, I am excited to see people again, actually, and be able to go down that road. But professionally, check us out at greenjuju.com. And also, we're not available in the UK yet or anything like that, unfortunately. But if you're in the States or Western Canada at this point, and I'm just looking forward to being able to, come up with some new cool stuff with Kelly, the founder, and be able to help as many dogs and cats as we can.
Absolutely fantastic. Billy, we love your style. We love your knowledge. We love what you're doing. And passing on our very, very best wishes to Kelly and the gang there. You're doing great work. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your excellent knowledge. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Absolutely. Anytime.
It's great. Fantastic. It's so great to see you. Thank you, Billy. Guys, that's us for now. If I was really organized, I'd tell you when the next one was, but I'm not. So keep your eyes on Instagram and Facebook, and we're going to have a Giorgio fairly soon. But there you go. It's the brave new world of the post-COVID, and summer is coming. So I'm going to be going on holiday and doing all sorts of things like that, and reading lots of raw and nutrition books to tell you about. Guys, thank you so much. Be well, feed well, and speak to you soon. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you.